With only 4 games left in the regular season, the Huskers find themselves at 4-4. For what it's worth, they've matched their win total from last season, and they've matched their win total from 2017. For the Huskers to make a bowl game, they must win 2 more games. And if we look at the Husker schedule for the rest of the season, they go on the road this week to play the Purdue Boilermakers, which we're going to talk about in just a matter of moments. Then they have a bye week before preparing for a matchup at home against the Wisconsin Badgers, which Wisconsin, they haven't looked all that well in these last few weeks. Then they go on the road against Maryland. Maryland is a team that has pulled off some upsets in the past and that have almost pulled off some big upsets. Like last year, they upset Texas. They've beaten Texas the last 2 seasons, and they almost beat Ohio State last year, which I think Maryland is an overrated team. I think Nebraska will probably beat Maryland, realistically, depending on what happens in the 2 games prior to that. But right now, I would say Nebraska would beat Maryland, so worst case scenario, Nebraska ends the season 5-7. And to finish off the regular season and potentially their 2019 season, at home against Iowa. So Iowa, that'll be a huge one. Although Nebraska has played Iowa pretty close in years past, like last year they played them pretty close. Back in 2015, they played them close. So that's a rivalry game that anything can happen. So Nebraska has a legitimate shot to finish the season 6-6, maybe even realistically 7-5. And then they could go to a bowl game, then beat an underachieving ACC team, maybe Virginia or Miami or even a Pittsburgh. So we got to look forward to this week, though, Nebraska and Purdue. Now, Purdue is in a similar situation that Nebraska is in, maybe in a much worse situation. Both of these teams have just been decimated by injuries all season long. For Nebraska, Spielman has missed some game time action against Northwestern. Adrian Martinez has been missing the last 2.5 games. Wan'Dale Robinson, he left the game early against Minnesota. Maurice Washington, not really necessarily injury stuff, but team conduct issues or whatever it was. And Purdue, their best player, Rondell Moore, he has been injured all season long. Their original starting quarterback this season, Elijah Sindelar, who was leading the NCAA in passing yards a few weeks into the season, he's been out indefinitely ever since about week 2 or 3. And Purdue has lost several key components on their defense. So both these teams have been decimated by injuries all season long. So the way I look at this matchup, it's pretty evenly matched on paper. Although the history and the recency bias would tell me to pick Purdue. Now, I haven't really decided if I'm going to predict Purdue yet until after it's time to make the prediction. So, Nebraska is 85th in scoring offense. Purdue was 100th in scoring offense. So, these two offenses, they've been struggling this season to get points on the board. And their scoring defense, it's almost even. In fact, it really is even. Purdue's giving up an average of 28.6 points per game, while Nebraska's giving up an average of 28.9 points per game, close to 29 points per game. And both of the offensive lines, they've given up a total of 20 sacks this season. So, not the best offensive lines, but not the worst either, fortunately. So the way I see this matchup, Adrian Martinez, he feels good to go this week, but the question is, will they play Adrian Martinez? Even if they do play Martinez, I don't think he's going to be that effective. I think the play calling will be very conservative this week if Adrian Martinez happens to be the starting quarterback, because you don't want any worse type of injury which could end a season, potentially maybe even a career, which happens sometimes. So if Vegel's a starting quarterback, which he feels good, third string quarterback Luke McCaffrey hasn't even been in pads this week. So both these quarterbacks are banged up. Vegel left the game against Indiana. Then Luke McCaffrey came in. He left the game. Then Vegel had to finish off the game, which he was not at 100%. So despite the injuries at the quarterback position, I think Nebraska, they played pretty competitive against a 6-2 Indiana team, which they played a lot better than I thought. I thought it was going to be a battle of two struggling offenses, but it was pretty high scoring. So I'm going to predict that Purdue will beat Nebraska, and mostly because Rondale Moore is questionable this week. There's a possibility he could play. And I think Martinez or Vegel, depending on who's starting at quarterback, I feel like the plays will be more conservative if Martinez is starting. But if it's Vegel, they may be more aggressive. But as I covered earlier, the history, maybe not necessarily overall history, but the recency bias would tell me to pick Purdue, because Nebraska has only one road win in the Scott Frost era, and I think it continues. I'm going to take the Boilermakers to beat Nebraska in, I'm going to say, a high-scoring game. I think with both these teams struggling on defense, I think it's going to be a lot of points. I think it's going to be the type of game that we saw last week against Indiana. I'm going to say Purdue wins 45-38. I'm going to say it's a high-scoring game. So that's my pick for the week. Purdue 45, Nebraska 38.